Okay, we're going to install a manual shift conversion kit onto a BorgWarner 1354. Kit is made by Behemoth Drivetrain. Alright, let's get started. We have our shaft that the motor would normally be turning. This is where the motor generally bolts up. These are notorious for being faulty and going out. Your shaft is triangular shaped. The point of that triangular shape basically points at the shift position that are marked in the casting of the housing. Right now we're pointed at 4 low. With this kit we're able to add a neutral position that falls between 4 high and 4 low. Alright. First thing we're going to do is install the sprocket gear onto the shaft. There's 3 set screws to accommodate the triangular shape of the shaft, and we have bronze bushing that later on will be supported by a pilot on the back plate, and that just helps things operate smoothly and concentric. You're able to install this in such a way that the point of the triangle could be pointing at a tooth, or you can install it in a different index and it be pointing in between the tooth. So when you get everything together, if your shift positions are a fuzz off, then you can take it back apart and move to a position that is slightly different and pick it up on a tooth or in between a tooth to get yourself fixed up. This one I've already put together and works better in between the tooth, so that's what we're going to go for here. Alright, so let's put this on the shaft. Now as you do this, you can feel it bottom out. Let me back this one off a little as well. You can feel it bottom out onto the housing, and you don't want it to be rubbing anything, so you want to make sure that you bottom it out and then you slide it out just a touch to give it some clearance. Now you can also get it as centered as you can on the shaft. It's a little goofy shape of a triangle, so it might be a little difficult to get it the first try, and it's not super critical. There's some clearance, some play in all components, and it doesn't affect operation, but it just gives you a little room for error. So we're going to get it locked down, and you don't have to kill these, you just want a good snug grip, and there's that. Alright, once you have that on, you will notice that it is fairly easy to rotate this and shift by hand. There's neutral, and in these cases the front or the rear output and front output are coupled together at this point, so your neutral is just basically disconnecting the input shaft. So you have a neutral, but your front and rear are still coupled together. So there's neutral. There is 4 high. Alright, then we come over here, and there is 2 high. You can feel it at the end of the shift. Okay. So I find it a little easier to install everything else with it in 4-low. So all the way counterclockwise, pointing at the 4-low position. Okay. So there's that. Next is an indexing ring, and this allows you to install this portion and the rest of the kit and index it so that the cable exits to your liking. For this one I'm installing it with the cable exiting this way. There's several positions. You may want it exiting this way, doing some different things for clearance against the cast housing and so on. So you have 2 different positions for these bolts that are going to bolt to the case, and then you have 3 different positions for your 3 holes that are going to hold the kit on. So several different places. Now I've already tested this out, and this is going to be the optimum position for this particular setup. So these are metric bolts. That's just what the case is threaded, metric. These are 6mm bolts. The rest of the kit is standard. We just like to use standard. Most folks will have more standard tools. Most folks will have more standard tools than metric. And standard bolts and different things for replacements if needed are usually more readily available than metric. So once you have those on, everything else is standard sizes, and so that's installed. Now I'm not using RTV sealant or any kind of paper gaskets, just for the demonstration purposes, so it's not messy and it's not as slow. But you'll want to seal this up as you put it together. Alright, now we're going to install the next piece, and this is basically a rack gear, straight gear, and it converts the linear motion of the cable shift to rotation. So it might take some finagling, but you can successfully line this up, and there is a bolt and bearings, and that's what the rack plate or gear rides on. Keeps things moving nice and smooth, and that holds it on. You'll have to kind of work it in between the gears. You may have to turn this a touch to get things to line up easier for you. Definitely not the hardest thing you've ever done. So, alright. So I've started out, I've got it rotated counterclockwise to the 4-low position, and then I've got my rack gear all the way to the right. And so you want to do that counterclockwise to the right. You could do clockwise and to the left, but either way you want to make sure you start out where this motion is going to match what the rotation needs to be, or you'll be fighting against it and you won't get any motion. So we've got that. Next is at this point you'll want to glob some grease in here and along this channel and detents, just to keep things operating smoothly. We'll put some grease in there, maybe put some grease in your bushing, and now we're going to line the pilot up with the bushing, which should go on fairly easily. Alright, and then the kit comes with 3 longer bolts and 6 shorter bolts, and so our longer bolts go in these through holes, and you want to get them started again. Should put sealant on each component as you stack them on. Get our thread started. Alright, and wiggle some things around. And then we're going to cheat and zip them on. Be careful not to over tighten them, break them off. Okay. Now, we're going to, at this point, you can put it together and test it out before you install the rest of your short bolts. We have our ball for a detent. We have our spring for a detent. Finally, we have the set screw to adjust the pressure of the detent. Get that started. And generally you'll hear it pop into place if things are going together right. I didn't hear it pop into place, so you may have to try something different, but anyway, we'll see what we've got. So for demonstration purposes, and as you set it up, I'm going to leave the detent fairly loose. As you get it together and you get it bolted in the floor, they shift. Here's their shifters. Shifts a lot better. Let me get that to come around here. They shift a lot easier once they're bolted in the floor and you've got something to oppose. But as shifting on the bench, you may want to back the detent off quite a bit. So, all right, we got our detent in. We got our plate together. So we are going to try to shift this beast. One thing to note, you've got to have your yoke on the rear. It actually holds a spacer which holds the main shaft in place and keeps everything where it needs to be for shifting. Without that, the internals just kind of move back and forth instead of things shifting into place. So make sure you've got that on if you want to be able to tell what you've got. So let's see where we're at first. Alright, we should be in 4 low. And that's what we feel like. And then the next one, right there, again, I got my detent backed off pretty good. So, alright, this should be okay, there's neutral. And again, neutral on these, your front and rear are turning together, but your input shaft is basically disconnected. So I'm holding the input shaft still, and the rear and front output are spinning. So there's neutral. Skipped it. Hard to feel the detents with it backed off, but that right there feels like we should be in 4 high. So let's see what we have. Yes, we have 4 high. Alright. And now, finally, 2 high. So our front output, we've got our connected there good. And then our front output, I can hold it still while I spin the input and rear output that are coupled together. So there you go. We're in 2 high. And again, this should be 4 high. And it is. Let's see. We skipped it. Come on now. Whew. Let's get some more detent. How about that? Just a little makes a big difference. So this should be 2 high. It might be 4 high. I might have skipped it. There's 4 high. So neutral should be, feel it right there. And yes, that's neutral. And now 4 low. And sometimes, as with most transfer cases, you need a rolling shift to go into another range. And that's what it wanted just then. And now we're in 4 low. Alright. Back to neutral again. Let's get more detent. This is something you just have to, yeah, we hear it now. Have to kind of keep playing with until you get the detent set like you want it. There's neutral. Alright. There's 4 high. And then this should be 2 high. It is. Okay. I'm going to check them out a few times. 4 high. It's still 4 high. Neutral. 4 low. Went right in then without any spinning. We're just going to keep on giving it detent pressure. Alright. So that should be, there's 4 high. Get my neutral. There's neutral. Get a little drag sometimes. May need to adjust it on the sprocket in between the tooth or on the tooth, one or the other. So anyway, just continue to play with it and see how you want your detent, where your sprocket needs to be set. Get it set up and kiss the electric motor goodbye. Everybody likes a manual shift better, so that's what we're getting. Alright, I'm going to put the rest of the bolts in and get this finished up, and it's ready to go. Enjoy.